In this video, we're going to be talking about getting acquainted in the user interface, the different administrative modes that you can get into, how to move around in them, possible error messages you might get when configuring the router that you need to pay attention to, some help, shortcuts, using your control commands to bring up previous commands and make it a little easier to move around in there. And the last thing we're going to be talking about is some things that you can do to the router to make it a little bit easier to work in when you're configuring it through the command line interface. As far as the administrative modes go, there are a few different modes. Now, it's very important to pay attention to the modes that you're in when you're working in this environment. The first mode you're going to get to is called user mode. Sometimes you have to get to enter a password to get there, sometimes you don't, depending on how the device is configured. The key to knowing what mode you're in is the symbol right here. When you're in user mode, you would have the router's name right here where it says user mode, and then the symbol would be a greater than symbol. That's the indication that you're in user mode. The first thing I do is when I'm in user mode is I get out of it. The reason I get out of user mode is because I can't really do anything. I can document certain configurations, I can ping, things like that, but I can't really view everything I need to, and I can't make any changes to the router. To get out of user mode, I type the command enable, and that will take me down to privilege mode. Now, I know I'm in privilege mode because that greater than symbol turns into a pound sign. Privilege mode, I can do certain show commands, which we'll be going over. I can use copy commands. I can turn debugging on, which lets me view in real time things that are happening to the router. If I want to get out of privilege mode and actually make a configuration change to the router, I have to go into global mode. I get to global mode by typing in configure terminal, which I'll go in and show you in a moment. In global mode, I know I'm in global mode because I have this config after the name in parentheses with the pound sign. From there, I can go to multiple different configuration modes. Anything I configure in global mode is going to affect the entire router. If I type in interface and then in interface, what's going to happen is it'll take me to interface mode. I know I'm in interface mode because it says config-if. If I type router RIP or router OSPF or router then a particular routing protocol, it will take me into the routing configuration mode. Again, name of the router would be here, and then it would say config-router in parentheses with the pound sign after it. Last one, or not the last one, but another one, would be, let's say if I were to go to one of the line modes, like the line console or the line auxiliary port or the line VTY for telnet. I type line console 0, and that would take me to line mode where I can configure the properties for accessing through the line console. Now, if I'm in any of these modes and I hit Control Z, what that's going to do is going to take me back to privilege mode, which is nice because this is where I can go in and show my work. If I'm in interface mode or routing mode, whatever the mode may be, and I want to make a configuration change that's going to affect the entire router, I type in exit and it would take me back to global mode. Any configurations made in global mode affect the entire router and don't apply to a particular interface. For an example, in global mode is where I would give the router a name. Out the router prompt, and I want to take a look at what mode I'm in. So the mode I'm in right now is user mode, and I know I'm in user mode because of that greater than symbol right there. Again, I want to get out of user mode immediately, so I type in enable to get out of user mode. Now, I don't necessarily have to type out enable completely. If I type in disable, that will get me out of privilege mode back into user mode. Now, watch what happens if I just type E and hit enter. I get one of the errors that you'll get. You'll get possibility of 3 errors. I get the error ambiguous command. Ambiguous command means there are commands that start with the letter E, but the router doesn't have enough information to discern what command I'm talking about. So what I can do is I can use the help inside of this router prompt, and I can put E question mark, no space after the E, and just put a question mark right after it. And what it does is it's question marking what letters could come next, or what commands start with the letter E. In this mode, there are 2 commands that start with the letter E, enable and exit. So what's nice about this router prompt is as long as it has enough letters to be able to determine what command I'm telling it, I don't have to type anymore. EN is enough for the router to be able to tell between enable and exit So all I have to do is type in EN, hit enter, and it takes me to the next mode. Do not try this in a Windows prompt. It's not going to work. Now, to get to the next mode, to get to global mode, I type configure, and watch what happens when I hit tab. I'm typing CONFI. If I hit tab, and the router has enough details to determine what I'm telling it, it'll go ahead and complete the command for me, but it will not execute the command. And then I type in the word terminal, TER, hit the tab button, and it takes me into global mode. Again, global mode is where I can make changes to the device that affect the entire device, like giving it a name. So let's go in and take a look at what happens when I go to give the router a name in global mode. I type host name, and then the name of the router. Enter. Here's another error. I typed that inappropriately on purpose. I do know how to spell host name here. Central. I typed host name wrong. Host name is all one word, but the problem is invalid input detected at marker. What's nice about this, host N, everything was fine up until that point, but when I got to the letter M, that's where the problem is. So what's nice about this is I can use a control command to bring up a previous command, control P, or the up arrow in most operating systems. And what I can do is I can use my backspace key, and I can type in N question mark, and question mark will go right where the M was. And what it does is it tells me how to spell hostname. So it says, hey, there's only one command that starts with HOSTN, and the next letter is not the letter M, it's the letter A, and it's for hostname command. But notice something. It says host N, here host name is the command. There aren't any other commands that start with HOST and the N. So what that's telling me is I've already typed in enough for the router to know that I'm trying to actually name the router and I'm using the hostname command. And what's nice about that is I'm a lazy typer, not the best speller, so I don't have to type the commands out completely. The name of the router I do have to type in completely, otherwise whatever I type in at this point, that would be the router name. So if I typed in CENT for central, the router's name is going to be CENT, coming in as CENT. I hit enter, and the router's name is changed. So those are two of the errors that we might get. So the two errors we've seen so far are the ambiguous command when it doesn't have enough characters to be able to tell what command I'm trying to tell it. Invalid input detected at marker when I mistype something. Let's see if we can find that last error that we might get. I type in host name space, hit enter. What happens now is I get incomplete command. This is the last error you'll see. Now, I get this a lot of time from students. They'll type something in, they'll be getting errors, not pay attention, and when they go back to look at the configuration of the router, it hasn't been done. If you do it right, most of the time it's going to show up in the configuration. So it's very important to pay attention to the errors. The router's not going to pat you on the back when you do something right. It's just going to go to the next prompt. But if an error pops up, you need to pay attention to it because it'll kind of give you an idea as far as what you're doing wrong. What we were doing wrong here is we typed hostname but didn't give it the variable. So again, anytime I get an error, I can go in and bring up the previous command, and I can put a space and then a question mark in this case because we got incomplete command, meaning hostname was right, but it needs the name. I don't know, maybe I don't know it needs the name. So if I don't know what it needs, I'll put hostname space question mark and it'll tell me. To the right is the description. It says this system's network name. So it wants the name of the router, and to the left shows me the format it wants it in. It just wants it in plain text. So I'll go ahead and give the router a name. I'm going to call it central again, so the name's not really going to change. Hit enter, and notice I didn't get any errors this time. That means I entered the command correctly. Now, we've taken a look at the error messages we're going to get. Let's take a look a little bit further, and we've seen this a little bit as some of the help that's available to us. Now, what I like to do is I just use the question mark. Depending on the mode I'm in, the question mark will give me different commands available for that particular mode. If I hit question mark, what's going to happen is it's going to scroll up with a list of commands that take up the screen. If I hit enter, that command list will go one line at a time. If I hit the space bar, it'll scroll a whole additional page. If I want to get out of the help, all I have to do is hit any letter on the keyboard and it'll take me back to my prompt. Let's see how the help is going to do when I want to put an IP address on an interface. So the command to get, and first what I want to do is actually go in and look at the router configuration real quick and see what interface we want to put an IP address on. To be able to look at the configuration on the router, we have to be in privilege mode. All show commands happen in privilege mode. Get into privilege mode, what I need to do is I need to use that Control Z. I could have typed exit there, it would take me back to privilege mode, but Control Z will always get me back to privilege mode. And the command that I want to use to show the configuration of the router, well, let's pretend I don't know what it is and let's use some of that help. I just put a question mark. Now I'm taking a look for it and it is going to be a show command. So I see right here, I see show. So I want to type in show because it'll help me show the running system information. That's the description to the right. So what I want to do is I want to leave that command in my sight, so I hit any letter to get back to my prompt. And what I'm going to type in is show and hit enter. Here's an error, incomplete command. So I'm going to type in show. This time when I get incomplete command, I do show space question mark, put a question mark. And here are all the things I can show. This is the one that I want, current operating configuration, so I can see how the router is currently configured. And notice something, this is the only command that starts with the letter R on this page right here. So let's go in and I hit any letter on the keyboard, type show. Again, it brings up my actual show command because I'd already typed that in. And I put in R. Let's see if there are any other commands that start with the letter R. There aren't. So if I just type show space R, it's going to show me my running configuration. I'll hit tab to complete the command, and I'm going to hit enter. The nice thing about the running configuration, and the reason I'm showing you this right now, is because this is a huge help for me, so it's kind of like a help guide as well. Everything you see in here, other than like version 12.1 at the top, is a valid command. Everything in here is a global mode command unless you see it subordinate to another command. Let's take a look at what I mean here. I'm going to go enter so I can go a few lines down. And we're going to look at the interface Ethernet 0 right here. So there's an interface on the router, a physical interface, and it's numbered Ethernet 0. Now, what this does is it shows me what I need to do from global mode to go in and configure an IP address on interface Ethernet 0. Since this is all the way to the left, I tell my students that since it's not indented, then that's a global mode command. And what that's showing me is, to be able to go in and put in an IP address, I first type interface Ethernet 0 in global mode. Then I go in, and right here it says no IP address. So if you want to get rid of a command you've done, you put a no in front of that command. So the command to actually put an IP address in here would be IP address. And again, this is very helpful because if I forget a command or I'm troubleshooting a router, I've actually fixed routers before not knowing what I was removing, but something didn't look right in the running configuration, so I go in and get rid of it. Obviously, I'll look it up real quick online, Google it, to see if it's something I can remove safely. Go in, remove it, and it's a great way to learn commands as well as fix things that look a little bit funny. So it's a very helpful troubleshooting tool. Let's go in and use this help here and configure an IP address on interface Ethernet 0. So I hit any letter on the keyboard, and the reason I did that at this point without showing any more of the running configuration, because I've already seen what I want to configure here. So I'm going to go in and configure it. Now remember, the running configuration, all these commands, valid commands you see here, start in global mode. So first I have to get to global mode. I type in configure. Again, I can use shortcuts, CONF space T for terminal, hit enter, and I'm in global mode. Now right here, I see interface Ethernet 0, so I'm going to go in and type that in. Enter, hit tab, it completed it. Ethernet, hit tab again, it completed it, and I'm going to put 0 there for that particular numbered interface, and I hit enter. Just like I'm seeing here. Now, in the actual running configuration, it says no IP address, so I'm going to go in and put an IP address. But maybe I want to check to make sure IP address is a valid command. So I'll go ahead and I'll put a question mark and see if I can see IP in there. I do see IP, so that is a valid option here. So I'm going to go IP space question mark again and see what commands can come after IP. Now there's quite a few popping up in here, and I know I'm supposed to put address, so let's put an A and a question mark and see all the commands that just start with the letter A. Address is one of them, access group is another. Access group is a command that will apply an access list to this interface. We'll be talking about access lists in another video. Address is what I want to put on here. I want to put an IP address on there. Minimum letters I need to type in, AD. So I'm going to go put AD, and I'm going to hit enter. Oops, incomplete command. I got to pay attention to that. I don't just type in IP address and hit enter. I've got to type some additional things. So to look at some of these control codes we can use, Control P brings up my previous command. And I'll go in, I don't need to type anything else, but I'll put a question mark here, and it actually wants an IP address. So after IPAD is telling me, hey, put the IP address in, this is the format I want it in, A, B, C, D, which is dotted decimal. So I'll go ahead and put an IP address in there. And I'll make this a gateway address for a local area network. If I think I'm done, I hit enter. Invalid input detected at marker. My SIM's acting a little bit funny here. What it needs next is actually a subnet mask. If I put a question mark here, what happens is it shows me IP subnet mask is what it wants next. So if I'm unsure that I have all the components of the command entered in, I'll go ahead and use the question mark here, and I'll see, okay, it wants the IP subnet mask. A, B, C, D is the format, which is dotted decimal, and I'll go ahead and put in subnet mask in there. Now, I don't want to get any more errors, so I do a question mark and see if there's anything else I need to type in. What it's showing me is the only option here is CR. That's carriage return, so I can hit enter. Notice I did not get any errors. Again, errors are going to let me know that I've done something wrong. If I don't get any, everything's good. Don't expect, again, something to pop up and say you've configured the router appropriately. Just goes in and tells me that I haven't done anything wrong. So we've used our help, checked out the running configuration, which is a huge help to me. Used the question mark quite a bit. Now again, let's take a look at using some of our command editing tools here. Control Z takes me back to privilege mode. And what I can do is Control P brings up previous commands. Control N brings up the next command. So if I'm going in typing commands, I can use my previous commands, my next commands. Let's say let's go back into an interface, and I want to go into interface Ethernet 0, and I go back to that interface. I don't want to put the IP address back in, but I want to make a change to it. IPAD. What I can do at this point is I can use Control B to go backward, and it'll take me backward. Control F will take me forward. Now I can get all these commands at Cisco's website, but it's also, I get the same thing just by hitting my back arrow. Back arrow, forward arrow. Up arrow brings up the previous command. Down arrow brings up the next command. So I don't necessarily have to use the Control P, Control N, Control B for back, Control F for forward. I can also use the up and down arrows as long as the version of Hyperterminal I'm using supports it. A little bit older versions of Hyperterminal that came on some earlier XP versions did not support using the up and down arrows, so you'd actually have to use Control B for backward, Control A to go to the beginning of the line, Control E to the end of the line, and those are some of those control commands that you can actually use. What's nice about Control A is I go right to the beginning of the line. If I want to get rid of this IP address, I just type in no right in front of that, hit enter. Notice I didn't get any errors, so the command went right, and I got rid of the IP address. If I want to verify that the IP address is gone, I type show running config, and I can check underneath interface Ethernet 0, and it says right here just what I typed in, no IP address. So I was able to remove the IP address. I've cleaned up my router prompt a little bit, and I want to go over just a couple of commands that I use to make the configuration environment a little bit more user-friendly. One of them is I turn off the IP domain lookup by default. What the IP domain lookup does is allows name resolution for DNS from the router. Now the problem is if I mistype a command, what happens is the router is going to broadcast for a DNS server and it's going to sit there hanging for a minute. With the no IP domain lookup, what happens when I mistype a command or mistype something that the router totally doesn't recognize, it'll go in and just say invalid name and take me right back to my prompt, so it's not going to sit there and hang. So no IP domain lookup will turn that off. Another big thing to do is if I go into my line console, the line console is the port on the back of the router that I use to plug in when I have physical access to the device to configure the operating system. So if I'm plugged into the line console, what happens is I get a bunch of pop-ups when I go in and configure things. And what will happen is these pop-ups will interrupt my typing. So by typing in the command logging synchronous, I tab that out. What that does is no matter what I'm typing or what I'm configuring, it always takes me right back to my prompt. When I did Control Z right here, an example of that would be if I were to start typing, it says sys5 configure from console. That's a little pop-up, and if I'm typing something, my text is going to show up over here on a router prompt. But by typing logging synchronous, when these syslog messages pop up, it takes me right back to my prompt and makes it a much easier environment to use. So for a quick little recap of moving around in here, I've exited out of the router. The first mode I get into is user mode. Again, we've got the name of the router, then the greater than symbol that tells me what mode I'm in. Enable is the command to get from user mode to privilege mode, but I don't have to type enable all the way out. If I type E and hit enter, I get the error ambiguous command, again meaning the router doesn't know what I'm talking about. There are commands that start with the letter E, but there's more than one of them. So I will hit my up arrow on my router, which brings up my previous command, and put a question mark without a space. It'll show me all the commands that start with the letter E. Enable is EN. There aren't any other commands in this mode that start with EN, so I'll go ahead and hit enter. And that takes me to privilege mode. I know I'm in privilege mode because I have the pound sign. Now from there, if I want to actually go in and make any configuration changes to the router itself, I type in configure terminal or CONF space T, which again, using the shortcuts. Makes it a lot easier. So now I'm in global mode, and I know I'm in global mode by looking at the prompt right here. Central is the name of the router. It says config and then has the pound sign. So that tells me that I'm in global mode. It's important that you know what mode you're in because not all commands are going to work in all modes. For example, show running config, show running dash config does not work in global mode. The only place it works is in privilege mode. Show run or running config works in privilege mode but not global. So if I'm typing in a command that I know is valid, like I just typed in show running config in global mode and I get an error, I want to take a look at the mode I'm in, make sure it's the right mode for that command, and again make sure I'm typing in the command correctly. One of those two things is probably happening if I'm getting an error and I know the command's good. I'm either mistyping it, which the error would tell me this is a mistyped command because there are commands that start in global mode that start with the letter S. But I know show running config is a good command, so I must be in the wrong mode altogether. When I'm in global mode, I can actually change the configuration of the router. Again, like the name, anything I do in here will apply to the entire device. And here I can go into different modes. Like I can go into the interface to put an IP address on a particular interface. Interface, E, hit tab. Tab completes the command. Ethernet is the only thing that starts with the letter E after the interface command in global mode. And then I specify the interface number, and it takes me to that interface. Again, if I'm here, and I type in IPADD, which is short for address, and hit enter, if I get that error incomplete command, that means I have to put additional components to the command for this to work. Hit my up arrow to bring up the previous command. If I go too far, I hit the down arrow to bring up my next command, and I put a question mark if I forgot what I'm supposed to put. Hopefully I don't forget I'm putting IP address after the IP address command. That's the whole point of that command in the first place. IP address again is the description of the command. ABCD is dotted decimal. That's the format it wants it in. So again, I can go in here and put that command or the IP address in. If I'm not sure what comes next, I put a space question mark. IP subnet mask comes next in dotted decimal format. If I'm wondering whether or not I need anything else, question mark right there. I see the carriage return. That means I can hit enter. Again, no pat on the back for doing it right. All it's showing me right to the next prompt. I didn't get any errors, so I know I did the command right. If I want to view it, I can either type in exit twice. Exit takes me back to global mode. Exit again takes me back to privilege mode. Again, exit will take you back one level at a time. Or I could have just used control, hold control down, tab Z, and it would take me back to privilege mode. And my command here is show. Again, I can tab it out to see the whole command. Running config, and it'll go in and show me the command I typed in. Remember, from global mode, if you're looking at the run, I typed in interface Ethernet 0, and then I typed IP address 192.168.1.1, and then the subnet mask. So everything that shows up in here is a valid command, and you can use this to help troubleshoot as well as to help you configure things or make changes to configurations when you know they're inappropriate, just by copying what's in the running configuration. In this video, we've talked about getting acquainted with the user interface, different administrative modes you're going to bump into, possible error messages, your help, shortcuts, some control commands, and some configurations you can do to make the environment a little bit more easier, the no IP domain lookup, and the logging synchronous commands.